Welcome to This is What Democracy Sounds Like. I'm Kevin Prang. This program is a presentation of Metropolitan Congregations United. MCU is a community organization that brings together religious congregations, community groups, and individuals to work for a common purpose, to create a better life for all residents of the region. We work at the intersection of race, economy, political power, gender, and the structures of oppression at work within us individually, within our organization, and within the community. We are working towards building people's control of the government, building community control of the economy, and expanding the public sphere, and creating structural racial equity. Today, my guest is Israel Collier. Israel is a St. Louisan, a social justice advocate, and has a nonprofit in Moldova. But today we're going to specifically be talking about the case of Bobby Bostic. We'll talk about the specific of what has happened to him and how this story reflects problems within the criminal justice system. So first of all, welcome, Israel, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always such a joy to collaborate with MCU. Honestly, over the years, it's been quite a joy.
Thank you. I guess, first of all, let's acknowledge that we're recording this on January 5th, 2021, and today happens to be Bobby Bostic's 42nd birthday.
Yes, perfect timing. Happy birthday, Bobby.
Happy birthday, Bobby. And he is spending this birthday as he has the previous 24 in prison. So we're going to talk about his case and everything that surrounds that. So introduce us to Bobby Bostic and who he is and what are the broad details to his case.
Sure. Bobby Bostic is a 42-year-old African-American male who sits in a Jefferson City Correctional Center right now. He has been serving since the age of 17. Bobby essentially was an accomplice to a crime, and we want to put that forward first, that this was a crime he committed, a violent one that had weaponry involved, basically 2 burglaries on a December night. He held up a man with gifts for a family as well as a woman and took over a car. But that's who he is in terms of the prison industrial system, who he is as a human. 42 years old, this dude has written 13 books, 8 poetry, 5 books. And he has been kind and gentle to me personally. We've written back and forth for almost 5 years now. He's a family man. He misses his family dearly, very kind. And he's an advocate, a self-advocate. Like, he advocates for himself. My colleague and I, he's Australian. We are both behind the scenes on Twitter and Instagram. And he writes us constantly who he wants us to reach out to. So he's his own advocate. And that's who he is. He's been very kind and gentle to me, very expressive. He writes poetry, like I said. He writes literature, like I said. And he's accomplished. He has 2 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. And he's, in my opinion, a reformed gentleman, a rehabilitated human who deserves the right to a resentencing and definitely clemency.
And tell us a little bit more about how you've become involved in Mr. Bostic's case and how you communicate with him.
Sure. I wrote, actually, it was for MCU, now that I think about it. I wrote for the St. Louis American an article about Raise the Age, which I have a question for you. How's that going? Sidebar. But if we had legislation such as Raise the Age in legislation at the time of Bobby's sentencing, he would not be in prison now, in my opinion. We have a very draconian system. And I think that is what we're up against, technicalities. So when I wrote the article for the St. Louis American, he actually read the article in prison and reached out to me. I got a letter, I think, through a third party. I won't mention the name. And we've been communicating ever since. Even while I was in Moldova, he's managed to get letters across the ocean, and we've communicated that way.
Okay, so we'll refresh folks' memories. Raise the Age is the legislation that was passed 2 years ago by bipartisan approval within the state legislature to make sure that 17-year-olds are tried as juveniles instead of adults.
Yep.
And when Mr. Bostic was going through his trial, he was 17. He committed his crime at 16.
Correct.
So he would have fallen under that. And you had mentioned what is up with that. And I think we're still waiting to find out. One of the things that we know is that there wasn't enough funding. It's an unfunded mandate that the legislature put through. So everybody said this is a good idea, but they haven't put any money behind it. So jurisdictions aren't necessarily moving forward. St. Louis City and St. Louis County are doing their best, but other counties within the state don't have the encouragement to do that. So that is something that's definitely on MCU's plate, to make sure that the funding comes through and that the state legislature comes through on their promise to juveniles, and especially those that are 17.
That'd be great.
So you established this connection with Mr. Bostic. So what does that mean to you to be able to advocate for someone that you now have a relationship with through this communication?
It's bittersweet, because I have to remind myself that this is a person, he's reformed. However, he was a criminal. And so the first instinct, a human instinct, is to protect myself and my family. Okay, I will be transparent in that. That has been a thought process. At the same time, 241 years gives me goosebumps even now as I talk about it. And I've been talking about it for years now. It's inhumane. And with my background, my public policy background, it's unconstitutional and internationally not legit. It's a no-no in the international world. This is non-humane. There's no other word for it. I can't think of another word for it. It's just inhumane. And his particular case, the fact that it's based on a technicality makes it even worse. And you would think that our politicians, our legislators would commiserate with that. But people dragging their feet on certain bills or using loopholes to advance their agendas. It makes you kind of leery of not only our criminal justice system, of course, but in terms of hope for Bobby. Like, what is he grappling on? Because he's still human. Like, I connect with him, like you said, and I wonder how he's doing with the delays, with these loopholes, with just people playing with politics and their lives. Because mind you, Bobby's not the only one. Bobby's not the only one. This is one incident. I mean, he's not the only one.
Right. And I think one of the things that I just wanted to reinforce is something that we talk about a lot at MCU, which is we are better advocates when we have a relationship with people in our community, so that when you get to know Bobby as a human being, then you are even more emboldened to advocate for him. Yeah.
And you're encouraged to keep going. Even I'm 8 hours ahead when I'm in Moldova. It's really hard for me to keep track of what's going on here. It's kind of like having two lives at one time. And so the fact that I'm still trying, it's not about me at all. But it's just, how do you sit behind bars with a 241 or 242 mark across your forehead thinking, will I ever get out of here? I've served my time. I was 16. These are laws. These are constitutional laws that are being broken. And
it seems, we'll get into some of the details as we continue here. It seems like technicalities keep tripping up his case. It's always a technicality. Each step of the way, it's a technicality. So let's talk a little bit about what surrounded Mr. Bostic's sentencing. Most of the time when we talk about criminal justice reform, the focus is on the police. But in this story, it sort of points to the problems inherent in prosecution and the discretion of judges. So tell us some of the details about how he was given a 241-year sentence for a crime where there was yes, a weapon was involved, but only a minor injury. And there was some question as to how much he was even sort of following versus being an active participant in this particular case.
Sure. In terms of what I know, and I wish I knew more, Bobby was given 241 years so two words to come to mind: concurrent versus consecutive. And unfortunately, he got the worst out of the deal, right? Consecutive, and that adds up to 241 years, as opposed to what his accomplice got was 30 years, and he was older, right? And so that's one loophole. Now the question is why? Why did Judge Baker give him 241 years? Was it because he wrote letters and didn't show remorse? Was it because he didn't really have support at the time? What other reasons? We could speculate, all day about why she gave him 241 years, but that's one of my burning questions. Like what, in addition to, just serving 85% of, the time served or the time sentenced, these are all questions that us laymen have that, rarely get answered.
And it does seem like that decision on concurrent versus consecutive was down to the judge's discretion. From what I can tell, it's not something in the law that said it had to be one or the other. That it felt like she was sending a message. Now, she would know better than us, and a legal scholar would know better than us. But if it was a difference between 30 years and 40 years, that's one thing. But the difference between 30 years and 241 is unimaginable.
Yeah, it's like you said, we could speculate all day, but it's like what in Bobby's case made her decide, okay, this is it. I've had enough, 241 years. And she literally told this young man, no one will be alive, when you see parole, no one. And that's personal almost. It's almost like, wow, what in particular happened in this case that she decided at that time, because she's since recanted, that she wanted to give this young man more than any of us would ever live, let alone, right, yeah, any of us would ever live. So. Right.
And it appears that some of the other facts of the case are that Bobby's accomplice decided to strike a plea deal, and that Bobby may or may not have had the same deal. But a lot of those consequences come down to, do you have representation? Do you have a lawyer? Can you afford the lawyer? What is the advice? And so again, the injustice depends on or the justice that's dished out depends on circumstances, what you have access to.
This is such a good point, Kevin. And this goes across all sectors. I mean, whether you're talking about criminal justice, housing, employment, I go through this in advocacy every day, whether it's health, you name it, education, what resources do you have? And unfortunately, like I said, Bobby's not the only one, but you have people sitting in jail because they don't have bail, right? You have people sitting in jail because our public advocates are inundated with cases, right? And in this case, Bobby was encouraged by his family and mentors, hey, don't take the plea. When you take the plea, apparently when you go to trial, it's better to go to trial. That's what I read in one of the articles. So don't take the plea because you're more likely to get a better deal in the hands of other humans, 12 other humans, right? And so I think he took that into account, which brings up a good point as far as a 16-year-old. How do we make those decisions at 16? There is plenty of medical research that backs up. We don't even have a fully developed, cerebrum until 21 years old. And even then we don't make really legit, decisions in terms of, life decision making. So at 16, how do you take all of that? You're scared, you're going to jail, you have no idea what's going on behind bars. And then to enter the adult criminal justice system, I can't imagine, but I'm not sure because I don't know. It's got to be a lot.
Yeah. And in this case, we're not even talking about the impulse decision when the crime was committed. We're talking about trying to navigate a complex legal system that lawyers go to school for to learn, and then they practice for years.
Yeah.
And even they argue back and forth about what the right thing is and things along those lines. And asking a 16-year-old to make that decision is incomprehensible to me.
Yeah.
So.
Ironically, our Supreme Courts can't even get it right. Something that he messed up, he couldn't navigate, like you just said. They can't even decide. Even our Supreme Court now has not giving a firm reason as to why they denied his most recent Supreme Court appeal. So.
Right. And if we step back in time, when his decision came down, it was the mid to late 90s. And at this point in time, we're in the Clinton administration, and this was part of the tough on crime era. So this is part of the 3 strikes and you're out sentencing rules. A lot of things that that were advocated for at that time have since proven to actually increase the incarceration rate in the United States, and as thrown more people in prison for minor offenses than should be there. So he's caught also in this historic moment of the mid to late 90s with this tough on crime attitude.
And just to add a component, African-American minorities, just to narrow it in there, just from my own perspective, I think to not say that is a sort of disservice to the Black community, because we are profiled, we are targeted in the criminal justice system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. You talked a bit about what Mr. Bostic has been doing while he's in prison. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Tell us about some of his achievements and what he's been up to.
Sure. Bobby is always busy. He has 5 books, like I said. One that comes to mind is, I think it's called Diamonds, and another is called Dear Mama. He's written a lot of poetry. Right now, he's working on a course for illiterate prisoners. And that, it blows my mind just thinking about something like that in prison. It sort of expands our minds. What is it possible behind bars? Bobby has so many accolades, lots of associates, a degree in business. He's always busy. I can't say enough about his own advocacy as well. Damien and I, he's the one behind Instagram at it's free Bobby Bostic, at free Bobby Bostic. He's always sending us different handles on Twitter to follow, or podcasts to reach out to, because he's been part of this hustle, for lack of a better word, to get him out of there himself.
So since Mr. Bostic has been in prison, there have been court cases that have actually related to Bobby's case that have made it up to the Supreme Court. Can you tell us a little bit about Graham versus Florida?
Yes, as far as I know, Graham versus Florida is a representation of Bobby. Basically, the gentleman was 16 years old. They let him free, and then they came back and took him and put him in prison for his burglary, if I'm not mistaken. In Graham versus Florida, though, the ruling says that a 16-year-old could not be given life without parole. That's what I'm trying to say. And so this is pertinent to Bobby's case, because Bobby was given 241 years and not given parole until he's 112 years old. So why is this important? It's important because Bobby will not be alive at 112 years old. So that rule doesn't necessarily apply with him. That's one of the technicalities that we're talking about. And so many people, including myself, get confused on life with parole and life without parole. Okay. This is essentially life without parole for Bobby. Does that make sense? And so, yeah, that's what we're dealing with. That's the technicality. And hopefully, Representative Schroer just put up a bill yesterday, Bill HB 636, just yesterday, that essentially edits. I have no idea what I'm saying right now, because I am not a lawyer, nor am I a politician, but I would call it editing an old bill and applying it to Bobby's case. And he submitted that yesterday. That's
really good news. So let's recap a couple of things. So in Graham versus Florida, the decision that was handed down was that a 16-year-old could not be sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Yes.
The technicality for Bobby's situation is that he technically was not given life in prison.
Exactly.
And he technically has a parole date.
Yeah.
Although his sentence is 241 years, which no one is going to make it to, and he is not eligible for parole until 112 years old.
Yeah.
So it in effect is the same, but the technicality has meant that the judicial system has said that it does not apply to Bobby in this case.
Yeah.
And what this reminds me of is kind of what we're going through now with COVID in the prison system, in that this is becoming almost a death sentence for those who were not sentenced to death.
Yeah.
They are facing a life and death situation with this devastating illness. Even if that was not their sentence, they are not being given the opportunity for freedom that is promised at the end of their sentence. So we sort of get hung up on the technicalities, but we don't realize, but we're not talking about what the full picture is in a lot of these cases.
That's a very good comparison. Yes. And I'm glad you brought up COVID, because this is something else like of concern for not just Bobby, for lots of prisoners behind bars who don't have adequate care like we have, like some of us have access to, who can't like constrict themselves from social distance or, practice social distancing or constrict themselves from other prisoners. It's impossible. So I wholeheartedly agree with that comparison. That's a really great.
Have you heard from Bobby about any COVID conditions and where he's at or how he's handling the situation?
No, I asked specifically about this. In one letter, he mentioned about COVID that basically they're not able to move around. But I've noticed in writing letters to this man that a lot of those details cannot come from behind bars. It's very superficial writing. And so even if he could share that, I don't know that he would, to be honest. Okay.
Just a follow up, you had said that Representative Schroer has filed a House Bill 636 that looks to apply this ruling to Bobby in this case. And a fair statement here that Representative Schroer is a Republican. Yeah. And this bill, I believe, or this effort got some support last spring, bipartisan, in our Missouri legislature, which is very rare.
Yeah.
So that's something to actually acknowledge.
Raise the age. He's also behind Raise the Age to be transferred.
Right. He actually did help get that through. So that's going in front of the state legislature this year.
Yeah. To add to that, because I try to be unbiased. Last year they put up 2201. So I won't get people's hopes up. They put up 2201. That went the whole summer and no one moved on it. And I was very upset and disappointed about that. Even though they had the whole summer to work on that bill, to push it through, they pushed through anything else they want to. Right. This bill sat there all summer, even though it was a special session put on by the governor himself. So this for COVID. So I'm just wondering, I hope HB 636 is not only edited or refined or whatever, but I hope more people get behind. And frankly, he's had a lot of support in the past, Bobby, from several different representatives and congressmen and women. However, this needs to continue if we're going to get him out of there.
Okay, good. I'm showing my notes that his case specifically did make it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Bobby's case did. It was supported by the American Civil Liberties Union and even garnered statements of support from a variety of people, including Ken Starr and Sally Yates, some pretty big name folks in politics. But then the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. You refused to take it up at all. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I've read as well. And again, the question is why? In particular, as much as I'm a Missourian, I just don't understand some of the politics here. And I'll leave it at that. A lot of the things we advocate for are absconded by very old policies, unfortunately. And that's what we're battling against this as well. Raise the age as well. Just so many things we could discuss that are Missouri is behind it. I'll give you a good example. Since the Graham versus Florida case, 5 other states have supported the legislation of the ruling. Basically, they've allowed 5 human beings to be released, basically appreciating the ruling as it stands. But Missouri, for some reason, has not done that with an individual who has 241 years. It just seems inhumane. It's beyond unconstitutional. And it's definitely just an injustice, seriously.
And there have been other paths that have been tried also. And I guess one of them we were hoping for this past December was pardons and commutations directly from the governor. And it seems like that has fallen on deaf ears also.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it was December, like it was the day before Christmas. He pardoned 24 souls. God be the glory for that. And commuted, I think 4 different sentences, and none of them were Bobby's. So again, the question is why? What is this governor waiting for? We pushed for that on Twitter. I've never gotten a response personally. I mean, there are other advocates out there for Bobby as well, but I'm in communication with them. And it just seems like our governor is not moving on pardon, please, let alone Bobby's particular case.
It seems like he's tied his political future to a tough on crime stance, and no matter what, and he's sticking to that, and not giving an inch one way or the other on that.
That's too bad, because I don't mean to speak badly of other humans, but what about the humanity of this? Right. It's inhumane. It's 241 years. No one will be alive. None of us will be alive. First of all, the sentence was cruel and unusual, which our Constitution speaks to that. And that is why you have the Florida versus Graham cases, because they speak to that. And 5 other states have accommodated that ruling. Why hasn't Missouri done the same?
Now, since we have a bill coming before the legislature, that obviously is something that listeners can advocate for by contacting their representatives about House Bill 636. What other things can people do to advocate for Bobby?
Sure. You can write to Governor Parsons directly. You can tweet him on Twitter, on Instagram. You can follow him there as well. You can write to Bobby. You can encourage him in terms of what other political things. So you can sign. There are 3 petitions out now. One has been out for a really long time. It's change.org, Stop Bobby Bostic from Serving an Unconstitutional Life Sentence. And then DIY Roots Action also has one. It's an also unconstitutional life sentence, without parole sentence for Bobby. But then the ACLU just recently put one out late last year requesting that Parsons specifically grant Bobby clemency. And you can, like I said, you can write to Bobby. You can just reach out to any representative that is involved. Nick Schroer, rather, is one of them. Barbara Washington is another one. She's a big advocate of Bobby's particular situation. Those are some things. And you can follow us on @free Bobby Bostic on Twitter and Instagram for updated information. We try to stay up to date. We are directly in contact with Bobby on a regular basis, both Damien and myself. Those are some things. And in addition to, I have to give some shout outs too. I said I would do that because French Coalition Against the Death Penalty, they are also big advocates. Missouri Prison Reform has been super, super helpful for me personally on the Twitter platform. I said the ACLU already. I put down MCU, of course. And Kenya Brumfield Young is at Tatted Professor on Twitter. She's been super, super helpful. She's a professor of justice, and she's been very, very beneficial towards just advocating for Bobby and getting us straight on the law jargon, because my background is totally in science and medicine. And I'm like, what, So yeah, just keeping us on our toes in terms of the information.
Okay, great. And we'll put links to all of these in the description for the podcast. If you're listening, no matter which app you're listening in, we'll put it in there so you can easily get to that. So thank you for that. You had mentioned writing to Bobby directly. Tell me why that's important.
He's human. And I have no idea what's going on in his mind, even as we speak. This is his 42nd birthday. Who wants to spend their birthday behind bars? None of us even can fathom that idea, right? And words of encouragement, that human interaction, there's research to support this, is so important. Think about us being in a pandemic, stuck inside. We're always, what's this saying? Scratching at the bit. Well, how can we get outside? How can we go and do things? It's because we're lacking that sort of human interaction. So I think encouraging words, poetry, try not to send pictures or cards because it kind of distinguishes prisoners. Just to encourage him, to tell him that keep going, don't get into trouble, stay focused, keep writing. Those things I think are so important for him in these last hours, because I really think we're closer. I believe it. I just believe we're closer.
And I wanted to wrap up by, Israel, just tell us a little bit more about the work that you do, and how do you see that work in advocating for Bobby Bostic as being related in sort of your mission in life, or what motivates you?
Yeah, I've worked with MCU actually, and public policy is a passion of mine. I now have a master's in public policy thanks to Central European University in Budapest, Hungary. And I have been in advocacy for a while now. Anything across any sector, I pretty much try to tackle, but I do focus on criminal justice reform, education, and of course, Roma rights and immigrant rights in the Republic of Moldova. So my nonprofit, Collier, which is Romanian for to cover, basically helps immigrants and Roma. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Roma, but I can explain that if you're not. Find housing when they are left homeless. Anytime you're in a, how do I say this, homogenous country like the Republic of Moldova, people who stand out are often marginalized across all sectors, be it housing, education, employment, or healthcare. And housing is the area that we try to focus on.
Okay, and remind our listeners about the plight of the Roma and how they fit into that, I guess, Central and South Central European mixture.
Yeah, so this is Eastern Europe, but you will find Roma all throughout Europe. You will find Roma here in the United States, actually. And Roma, I often give this explanation to make it simple because it would take a whole nother podcast. They are the Black people of Europe. Anything that you can think of that African Americans are discriminated against, that's similar to Roma. Now, I would never compare African Americans to Roma. That's different because they have their own discriminatory practices towards them. But I think of it as discriminations in general. So like I said, healthcare, employment, education, housing. These are all things that apparently Roma are seen as less than in terms of benefiting from these rights.
And I would guess that, from what my understanding too, that history is at least as long as the struggle of African Americans on this continent.
Even longer.
Hundreds of years.
About 100 and so years longer.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yep. You got it.
They also were a target during World War II by the Nazis, but that just like the Jewish residents of Europe, that discrimination goes back before even World War II.
We're talking Roma. Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Very good. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Israel Collier, for being a guest today.
Of course.
And your credentials are that you are a St. Louisan who is passionate about social justice and advocate for those who need it. But you also have a nonprofit in Moldova that you work at professionally. To learn more about MCU, go to the Metropolitan Congregations United website at mcustlewis.org, Also, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for news and events. And we'll put links to all of the advocacy things that we talked about in our description.
Great.
So go ahead and click on those. I'm Kevin Prang, and you've been listening to This Is What Democracy Sounds Like. Tune in again next time, and thank you for listening.